Well, hello and welcome everybody to this free webinar hosted by Self-Managed Super, and it's entitled Sitting Down with the SMSF Association. And basically we're going to cover a few topics that are hot topics at the moment, but also some of the content that's going to be covered at the National Conference, which will be held in February. And the theme is collaboration, unleashing collective potential. And joining me today is Peter Burgess, who is the Chief Executive of the SMSF Association, Tracey Scotchbrook, who is Head of Policy and Advocacy at the SMSF Association, and Fabian Bussoletti, who's the Technical Manager at the SMSF Association as well. Welcome, everybody. If I could just ask you all to now turn your cameras on so we can see you, that's great. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining me. I'm so excited about presenting this webinar. Really pumped.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Darren. It's really exciting to see the highlights package there from last year's conference and feeling quite excited, actually.
Yeah, I was watching it too, Tracey, and I can't believe it's nearly been a year since
I know, it's gone quick.
It's
ridiculous. Gone very quick.
But as usual, looking forward to a great conference. So as I said at the start, we're going to be looking at some of the issues that will be covered during the conference, but also some broader issues as well. But we're going to start because what better place to start than your session, Peter, which will be your trademark regs and legs update. And see, obviously there's been a lot going on, so we're not going to be able to cover everything, but see some of the more significant things that have been announced in the last couple of days. I suppose we can start right at the top of the list. One thing that did go through, which was maybe a little bit unexpected because it didn't dominate discussion, but that was the objective of super, which has now been enshrined into law. The objective that they've come up with, they didn't change the wording, to preserve savings, to deliver income for a dignified retirement alongside government support in an equitable and sustainable way. Is that good or bad?
And hello, Darren, and hello, everyone. Yes, look, I think I should start. We always start with a legislation update at the start of our national conference, and we like to do that so that we get all delegates up to date with what's happened in the latest changes to the legislation, and so they can hit the ground running at the conference and ensure that all of our delegates have got that base level of understanding of what's changed and what's about to change, because some of the workshops and concurrent sessions do assume a certain level of knowledge. So we like to start our conference with that session. Now, I guess in relation to the objective of super, yes, you're right. It was passed by the Senate, excuse me, last Thursday. It was one of the bills included in that guillotine motion, the so-called guillotine motion that the government called it. I think, from our perspective, we're supportive of this objective. Certainly, it's been many years in the making, and when we first started out in this journey, we were, we agreed with the idea of having an objective for super. We think it's a good idea that everyone understands what we're trying to achieve with the superannuation system. We think it's a good idea that government measures have more scrutiny attached to them. And we think it's a good idea that you enshrine something like this so that the government of the day can't just make ad hoc changes to the legislation to suit their own political agenda at the time. And that's really where this started from. I think where we've ended up, though, is somewhere different to that. And we've got a statement which it's not law, so it's in terms of it doesn't have the backing. It's not legally binding, I guess is what I'm trying to say, but it is an intention, a statement of intention, if you like. So I guess it remains to be seen whether this objective will be effective in terms of stopping governments of the day making ad hoc changes to legislation. And the one thing I would say is that some of the principles which, of course, underpin this objective, which is now in the law, is the principles of equity and fairness and sustainability. And you've got to ask the question, how is things like taxing unrealised gains, which is part of this Division 296 proposal, and how is taxing people on amounts they haven't received, how is that fair and equitable? So I would like to think that we've got this objective in place, that the government may reconsider some of those aspects of their Division 296.
Yeah, Peter, you said it wasn't legally binding, but the way it works is that all superannuation policy now must be seen through this lens or must be assessed through this lens and must take into account this objective while it's being formulated. So while it's not legally binding, it is certainly, well, supposed to be a significant um, element, I suppose you could say, in formulating superannuation policy from here on in.
Well, that's certainly what's intended here, but as I said, it's not legally binding. It's just a statement of incomparability. It's an intent, if you like. So, as I said, it just remains to be seen just how effective that's going to be, given that it's not legally binding.
Can I ask all three of you, I suppose, when the government first announced its intention to enshrine this objective into law, they threw out this statement, which I read at the start, with the wording around the objective. But there was, at the time, quite a bit of debate about what some of those elements mean, and whether or not it's the absolute appropriate, definition to have. I suppose some of the contentious things were a dignified retirement. What is a dignified retirement? I don't think in the years that I've covered the industry that anybody has been able to agree on one set thing that would define that. Also, equitable and sustainable. Again, contentious sort of broad terms that the industry was probably a little bit worried about how they would be interpreted. So, had discussion finished around those issues, and where do we sit now?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, isn't it? And I know that different stakeholders have had a variety of different reviews in response to those very issues that you've highlighted. And I guess the challenge for any government when they're setting down a policy such as this is it needs to be broad enough that it allows it to be functional. But you're right, it does leave it open for interpretation, and there is an element of subjectivity. And what someone might consider to be dignified retirement or sustainability of the sector could be quite different to someone else's. And so I think this is where the policy discussion needs to play out, how those sort of elements are intended to operate when they're looking at various measures so that they can be properly considered. But it's sort of, I guess some have sort of questioned, well, what is the value of it? But I think it's a good thing that we've got it there, that we can hopefully have these really constructive conversations around policy development and around the legislation that then follows from that.
Yeah, I suppose, again, we have to wait and see how these things will be tested. And again, none of us really knows what the practical application of this will be just yet. Obviously, it's just dropped. So I suppose it's going to be an ongoing thing to figure out what the actual practical implications are.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll refer back to this objective, but I suppose I'll move on to the next item that's obviously been dominating discussion ever since it was mooted as well, and that's the Division 296 tax. And the bill, that one didn't actually go through, did it, Peter?
No, thankfully, that was one of the bills that was taken out of the guillotine motion. So it certainly was a dramatic day last Thursday. At the very last moment, the government did try to include the bill, the Better Targeted Superannuation Concessions Bill, in what they call their guillotine motion. But thankfully, key members of the Senate crossbench stood up and opposed that. And I think that was a milestone moment, really, not just for our advocacy efforts, but for everyone that's worked so hard to make sure that the Senate crossbench understood the consequences of this very badly designed tax. So the fact that they stood up against it was a good thing. Now, of course, it may well be passed in February. There are sitting days in February, and if no election is called, then this bill will be considered as part of those days, because what we do know, the motion that was passed to split this bill in two, part of that motion requires those bills to be considered on the first sitting day when they come back again in February. So we will see these bills considered. It is possible that it may be passed then. And for our, from our perspective, it's just unclear how much political capital the government is prepared to expend on this measure, which has so many unintended consequences and so many people believe sets a very bad precedent for future tax reform. So, we hope they don't proceed, particularly in its current form, but we're just going to have to wait and see.
Peter, I know that you wrote a blog recently on the SMSF Association website about your views on how this progresses forward. And you had a very optimistic view that it won't progress any further than this. I share your optimism. I've got my fingers crossed that that will be the case. What led you to that conclusion?
Yeah, well, as I said in that blog, 24 hours was a long time in this game, and it certainly was last week. But it seemed to me that I think we used the word zombie bill in the blog. Given that the government was saying that, look, this is still policy, we're going to still try and get this through the Senate. The fact that they had not been having discussions with the Senate crossbench, and we had been talking to the members of the Senate crossbench, and that's what they were saying to us, that the government had not reached out to them to discuss this bill with them. We felt that was very strange. If the government was thinking they were going to get it through, well, then surely they would have been having some conversations with the Senate crossbench. So that led me to the conclusion at the time that perhaps this was just a zombie bill, that they were going through the motions, that they needed to keep that $2.3 billion in revenue on their books. But I have to say they tried a bit harder than I expected on Thursday to get that bill through. So, as I said, we're just going to have to wait and see. We hope they won't proceed with this bill. There are significant issues with it, as we know. We know that the Senate crossbench do not agree with taxing unrealised gains, and they don't agree with the lack of indexation. Now, how you fix taxing unrealised gains is the issue, because that can't be fixed without a major overhaul of this bill. And I think that's the real problem the government faces. If they want to secure those votes from the Senate crossbench, they are going to need 3 votes to get this bill through, assuming the Greens do vote with the government on this bill. It's not clear to us where they're going to get those 3 votes from. We hope that the Senate crossbench stands their ground and is resolute, on their opposition to taxing unrealised capital gains.
Now, going back to our original discussion about the objective of superannuation, and I think we came to the conclusion that we don't know how that's going to operate until it is actually tested. Is that actually going to be a positive in this context? Because the policy hasn't been adopted yet. Is that going to have to be looked through a lens of that objective from this point onwards to see whether or not it should go through? And I suppose what I'm talking about there is those contentious terms, equitable and sustainable. By the government's own admission, this was only going to affect roughly 80,000 Australians. Is that equitable, that such a significant policy actually comes in but only affects 80,000 people? But that's by their own definition. Of course, I'm not trying to make things up or embellish things, but by their own definition, will this create a rod for its own back as far as this policy goes in the future as well?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting question. No doubt the government will argue on the sustainability grounds that this tax is needed. But as I mentioned earlier on, I think you can quite easily ask other questions like, how is it fair and equitable that we are taxing people on amounts they haven't received? So that's the question I'll put out there. And again, we'll just have to wait and see how they apply these concepts. But I guess we're not against a conversation on the tax concessions. And we've never been against having a conversation about the value of the superannuation tax concessions. That all we ask for is that all the facts and figures are presented so that we correctly cost these tax concessions. And we have all the facts and figures so that we can make appropriate decisions and not just decisions that suit the narrative of the government of the day. So yeah.
Now, Peter, in your blog, you labelled it a zombie bill, I think was your expression. So does the association's advocacy efforts end there on this issue? Will you continue to pursue Canberra for better outcomes and obviously continue the conversation if it needs be around the tax concessions, but from a different type of perspective, but it's probably linked to this? Where do you sit there?
Yeah, look, we'll continue our advocacy efforts on Division 296. We believe it's bad policy in its current form. It's poorly designed. So we'll continue to advocate for the bill to be removed, and continue to point out to government that, particularly in the lead up to the election, is this really a measure they want to proceed? Given that there's been some backlash to this, not just from people that are directly impacted by this tax, but by those that are worried about the precedent it sets for future tax reform. And I think that's what's got people particularly unsettled because, what's next? If we go to start to tax unrealised gains in superannuation, it could, happen to other types of investment vehicles as well. And I think that's what's got people unsettled. The government has underestimated, I believe, the pushback that they're getting from the community, not just from those who are impacted, because they keep saying, well, it only impacts a small number of people, people that have more than $3 million in super, but there's been significant backlash, from our members about this and so forth. So, we'll keep reinforcing that message to government that is this really a measure that they want to proceed with in the lead up to the election.
Yeah, it's a great point, Peter, because this could well end up being the same issue as the franking credits thing was a few elections ago. Again, not necessarily because of the bill itself, but that whole element of taxing unrealized capital gains. I mean, as you say, it sets a terrible precedent that I think a lot of people are looking at and thinking, oh, I'm not sure that's such a great idea.
Well, that's right. And there are other ways, if we have to start to pull back these concessions for people with large balances, there are other ways in which they could do it. The option that they've chosen is the worst approach that I've come across. So, again, we'll keep reinforcing that message.
Now I'm going to move on to another topic that I know you feel extremely passionate and strongly about, Peter, and that is the subject of legacy pensions. There was obviously a very welcome reaction to the 5-year amnesty that was announced previously, but it's a bit bogged down now, isn't it? Because some of the interpretation is that it is linked to the Division 296 tax proposal. And if that doesn't get up, legacy pension solutions might be put on the back burner as well. What's the story there?
Yes, look, we're hearing that and we understand that is the case, that we won't see these regulations tabled unless Division 296 is passed. Now, obviously, we're concerned about that. We have been advocating for a number of years now that we do need an amnesty for these type of pensions. And in the submission that we made on these draft regulations, we made that very clear and provided some real case examples that really illustrated very clearly as to why we need these regulations now, why we need this amnesty now, and it shouldn't be tied to Division 296. Now, we know the government is keen to get these draft regulations tabled in law as soon as Division 296 is passed, because they want people to have enough time to be able to commute out of these type of pensions before Division 296 kicks in, because we know once we go into the next financial year, and assuming the Division 296 legislation is passed, well then allocations from a fund reserve, which is typically how these legacy pensions work. If you're commuting out of these pensions, there will be allocations from fund reserves. Those type of allocations get counted towards earnings for Division 296 purposes. So Treasury is keen to ensure that people have enough time to take advantage of this amnesty rule But the way things are working, they're running out of time, because the earliest we'll see Division 296 pass, of course, it's February now. And if we see these draft regulations tabled and in law soon after that, it doesn't give people a long time to make the adjustments they need to their pensions before Division 296 starts. So, we're hoping it's not tied, but certainly we're hearing that. And we think that's unfortunate, because we have been advocating, as I said, for many years, that we need this amnesty. You think about people who have quite small balances now in these legacy pensions, who are stuck in these self-managed super funds with these pensions. They can't do anything about it. And, there's some of the examples that we provided to Treasury in our submission. But overall, we were very happy to see that the exposure draft, as I said, is something we've been advocating for. It was actually even more lenient than we had previously advocated for in terms of the amnesty period. So we were really happy to see that, but just not happy to see it linked to Division 296.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. And sort of to reinforce your point, Peter, about who has these types of structures and who has these pensions. One of the contributors to my magazine recently wrote about a different dimension, and that is how many advisors out there have the knowledge to actually deal with these. Because if you're talking about that sort of time frame again, some of the advisors who would have set these things up, back when they were relevant, may have retired or exited the industry. So will new advisors be able to, pick up the baton and say that, oh, yeah, it's all right, I've got this under control? I mean, they might not be able to get their heads around that legislation themselves, because it's completely foreign to them, because it wasn't relevant or existent when they actually entered the industry.
Yeah, look, that's absolutely right. These are complex, pension vehicles, and it does require specialist knowledge, that's for sure. And I can't imagine anyone coming into the industry wanting to specialise in this sort of area, particularly after we've got the amnesty, if it does proceed, and we're going to be left with hopefully not too many of these pensions. That's the idea behind the amnesty. But so yeah, it is going to be tricky, that we are going to be left with very few clients, we think, assuming these regulations go through, that we'll continue to have these pensions going forward. And there's not going to be many advisors out there that understands how they work.
Is that the fact that, people with legacy pensions, it's not a voluminous amount of people, does that compromise the relevance and the urgency around how this issue is being tackled?
Well, it has compromised it to date. One of the reasons that we haven't seen a lot of action on this, in my view, is because there's just not enough people in these type of pensions. So it's not on the priority list, if you like, for government to bring these regulations in. But when Division 296 was announced, we were very quick off the mark to Treasury to say, hey, look, this is another reason that we need this amnesty, because we want these pensions, as many as we can, cleaned up before Division 296 comes in. And thankfully, they listened to what we had to say. So if we didn't have Division 296, we may not have seen these draft regulations as soon as we have. We hear that they're still on that sort of program of work, but they may not have been as high on the priority as what they have been. So the fact that, yes, there is not massive amounts of people in these type of pensions does in the past has meant that it hasn't received the priority that it has. But it was interesting in the explanatory memorandum for the Division 296 bill, they did do some analysis of the impact of this tax, excuse me, and they did. There were some interesting figures in there about the number of self-managed super funds that actually have these type of pensions, and there was quite a few thousand, more than I actually had expected. So there might well be more of these legacy pensions out there than we initially thought.
Okay. Look, from a speculative and from an optimistic perspective, and of course, I'm looking to test the objective of super as much as I can. Again, to those debatable concepts of equitable and sustainable, surely this could be argued that legacy pensions aren't sustainable in the current
Well,
system.
that's a great point. And certainly some of the examples we put forward in our submission, which illustrate very clearly why we need to allow these people out of these pensions. It's a great point, Darren, as to how you can argue it's sustainable. You've got a sustainable system when we've got people locked in these type of pensions which are no longer fit for purpose. So again, let's hope that they use the principles of their own objective to proceed with these regulations.
Absolutely. Now, Peter, it wouldn't be a legs and regs discussion without the subject of non-arm's length income and non-arm's length expenditure, NALI and NALE, I think people refer to them as. Where are we at with those provisions right now?
Yes, look, it always seems to be something happening with non-arm's length income. I can't remember a time when I've presented this opening session where I haven't covered something to do with non-arm's length income. I don't normally finalise what I'm going to cover until closer to the event, given it is supposed to be a legislative update. But I think it's fair to say that I will be covering off on the changes that were made this year to non-arm's length income. So we saw those changes enacted back in June. So we're now in the 2 times shortfall regime for general expenses. So I'll talk about this new regime, talk about some of the changes that the ATO are proposing to make to their law companion ruling on non-arm's length income. So they have recently updated that to cater for changes that were made to the legislation during the year. It's only drafted at this stage out for consultation, but I'll talk about some of those changes that the ATO are looking to make, and also touch on some of the unresolved issues, not just with specific fund expenses, but also with general expenses as well, and some of the conversations that we're continuing to have with Treasury and others, trying to get some of these aspects of the non-arm's length income rules brought back to the table, because in our view, the job's not done. We've still got issues that need to be resolved, particularly in relation to these specific fund expenses and the way the rules, the 2019 amendments to the rules work for those expenses. So I'll be having something to say about
that. Looking forward to it. On a broader sort of spectrum, looking at the sector, are there any sort of opportunities that you're going to identify as well?
Yeah, look, I'll talk about the sector, particularly the $1 trillion milestone. So we have now surpassed that, which is a major milestone for this sector, and I think is a good illustration of the confidence that Australians have in self-managed super funds and the value of choice and the benefits of self-managed super funds. So, I'll reflect on the journey of the SMSF sector and the $1 trillion milestone, and we've also got the ATO Commissioner, Rod Heffernan, will provide a short keynote address, and we've asked him to reflect on the industry surpassing that particular threshold as well. Also look at some of the opportunities that I can see for the sector going forward, which will be a nice segue into Andrew Inwood's session at our conference, who's going to be talking about why the next decade may be the best ever for the self-managed super fund sector. So that'll be a particularly interesting session, I think.
Yeah, I'll be interested to find out why the next decade is going to be the best ever, because the previous decades have already been pretty good for this sector. So let's see what the future holds there. Tracey, I'm going to turn to you now, and your session is about shaping the future of the SMSF industry. And if ever there was sort of a concept that reinforces the theme of the conference around collaboration between professionals and practitioners of different walks of life, this would be it, because they all play a part in shaping the future of the SMSF industry. I might start, as far as that goes, with the retirement outcomes announcement that was made recently by the government around this whole need to address better income streams and those sorts of structures for people who are in retirement phase, because obviously the whole focus has been on accumulation phase up until now. And as we continue to have this generational shift, it's going to be more important as to what we do in the drawdown phase. Some of the things that were mentioned was enhanced consumer guidance via Money Smart, voluntary principles and best practices for retirement product design, and new retirement outcomes reporting framework to commence in 2027. What do you make of all of that?
Yeah, it was quite an interesting announcement, wasn't it? It was a joint announcement by the Treasurer and the Assistant Treasurer, which is effectively setting the sort of the policy advocacy landscape for superannuation and retirement for the next 2 years. So starting in early 2025 through to 2027. And it'll be interesting, of course, to see what happens in terms of the election and what the government looks like post-election and what impact that has on this body of work. As well. But starting with the information and guidance piece, look, it was great to see that particular announcement and the fact that that is going to kick off early in 2025. So that's about sort of evolving and refreshing and updating that Money Smart website, which is that sort of independent information source available for consumers. And this is a really important piece of the puzzle, having that sort of crucial information to help people, particularly those who are not advised, because otherwise other avenues then sort of look to fill the void, and it's not really great that people are getting their information or their advice from social media. So this is probably a project that's long overdue, and so it's great to see that is on the agenda, because that is an important complementary piece to what we're seeing with the tranche 2 delivering better financial outcomes, so that new class of advisor and the other financial advice reforms. So we need to make sure we get the balance right. Interestingly, though, we are seeing some tie-in around the retirement income covenant, as well as the delivering better financial outcomes as a part of this overall sort of policy scaffold. So the government has recognised, yes, we've got the big retirement. We're having larger numbers than ever before coming into retirement. And with that, increasingly, and particularly as we start to see the generational shift around retirement, larger balances, because we're having people who've had the benefit of super guarantee throughout their working lives. And so we're now starting to see those larger superannuation balances coming to fruition in retirement. So that was always the intention of the superannuation system. So we're sort of moving away from that transitional phase to, I guess, a sign of maturity for the sector. So we've had the retirement income covenant in play, which is about the APRA funds sort of engaging with their membership as they're leading into retirement and in retirement, making sure that certain cohorts of their memberships have access to sources of information that are relevant for them. And we know that the large funds have been really keen to get these tranche 2 reforms in, so they get that new class of advisor to really help facilitate this. So we have that aspect, which is going to be a really important piece. But the product innovation was interesting, but probably not surprising. So about 12 months ago, we had a superannuation retirement consultation paper that explored a broad range of things. It looked at the retirement income covenant. Is that working as intended? Do we need to tweak any areas of that? But it also looked at the retirement income products, and there was a strong themes around innovation. So I think as an outflow of that consultation, we've seen that now inform this particular policy drive. It seems to be linking into that retirement income covenant piece, having that development of new products, new policies and principles that the APRA funds will sort of co-determine those principles about driving innovation. What we don't know is what impact those will have on the SMSF sector. So the retirement income covenant currently doesn't extend to SMSF trustees, but we know anytime that there's any shift in the dial around superannuation policy, that there will be some outflow or some impact for SMSF. So what that will be is not immediately apparent from the announcement, but we would hope that some of that innovation around products can actually extend into the SMSF space to provide greater choice across the market.
Tracey, just upon first look, obviously, just with that concept around product innovation, is there a danger that there's too much emphasis on product being the driver to find a solution in this situation, as opposed to strategy, which I think SMSFs have more relied upon to find better retirement outcomes for their members, and potentially why members of public offer funds actually do switch to an SMSF when they approach their retirement years. Is there a danger that there's too much emphasis on product innovation?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And we know that there hasn't been a lot of innovation in this space. And we know that there have been those in the market who've tried to position other products and they really, really haven't succeeded. So whether that is a product design issue or, as you say, the advice looking at a client's individual needs is able to fulfill those needs through a variety of other avenues, it is going to be a balancing act. And the concern we do have around product is to make sure that we don't sort of repeat the errors of the past. So we've had a really good conversation already around the legacy pension issues. And one thing we pointed out in response to that consultation paper late last year was that we need to take the lessons from that legacy pension space and make sure that we don't end up with people who are trapped in products which may have been fit for purpose at the front end, at the beginning, but as things evolve and change, they come to a situation where they're not fit for purpose. So they need the flexibility of being able to move or adjust to suit their change of circumstances or changing needs.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tracey. And considering there is so much legislative and regulatory change in this industry, I mean, there has to be, otherwise you wouldn't have that first session every year, Peter. It is so important really to make sure that everything moves along with those shifts as well, just to make sure that everything's fit for purpose, because it's pointless if it's not fit for purpose anymore.
Yeah, completely agree. And your point around advice, that's a big one. And information is key here for anyone who's leading into retirement or already in the retirement phase. We know with tranche 2, we're going to have the new class of advisor. We're going to see that information piece coming through with the ASIC Money Smart website. But there's still gaps out there in the advice space. And so we need to make sure that everybody has access to appropriate advice in their circumstance from a suitably qualified professional.
Yes. Now, the next subject I'm going to address is not actually one that you'll be discussing in your session, Tracey. Instead, it's going to be the one presented by Ketty Waller, who's your new policy manager. And what a great hire she is, because I've dealt with her before at CPA Australia. Very, very, very professional individual. And Kath Bowler is going to co-present that session with her. She's from Holly Nethercote, also an ex-CPA Australia person, Kath Bowler. But they're going to be talking about the anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing reforms that are going to include the accounting profession for the very first time. Can you give us a bit of an insight into what all this means? And again, ties into the theme of collaboration, because they're being brought into it for the first time. Can they collaborate with other individuals who have more experience around this to figure out how they approach it?
Yeah, this is going to be a really important session for our members, our financial planners, but particularly our accountants. So we saw last week with the flurry of bills through the Parliament on Thursday, one of the measures that did pass through were these amendments to the anti-money laundering legislation. So a big part of that has been we're going to see a larger number of professions or businesses now captured under the AML-CTF regime, which will include accountants, gold bullion dealers, the likes of real estate agents and settlement agents, so just to name a few. So there's going to be a lot of different business types that are going to be brought into the fold for the very first time. And for accountants, they're going to have quite high obligations and possibly more so than the financial planners. So whilst we've seen some amendments come through that will impact financial planners, they're already in this space and very, very au fait. And yes, we'll have some adjustments, but the biggest adjustment will be for accountants. And one of the pressures here is going to be the fact that they already have client identification obligations now with the client agent linking with the tax office. They have separate identification requirements under the Tax Practitioners Board. And we're now going to have this third obligation, which again, quite separate to the other obligations around the AML-CTF. And particularly for those who are looking after SMSF clients, when they're establishing and registering new companies, establishing new trusts or superannuation funds, there'll be identification obligations. And indeed, those providers of those document services will have an obligation as well. So anyone who's running trust accounts, handling client monies, and we're not talking about tax refunds here, where they might use their trust account for various deposit monies or other client funds, then they're going to be captured. So this is going to be a really important one for accountants to get across, to understand, and to start to build into their practice management processes. So that they are complying with this. Crucially, it's not just the LAW law, it will also be the AUSTRAC rules and guidance. AUSTRAC have recognised very early, well before the bill passed through both houses of Parliament, the need to engage with these new industries and professions. And we've been speaking with AUSTRAC, as indeed have the accounting bodies, and that consultation process is already underway as they look to better understand how those businesses operate, what are some of the unique characteristics, what are going to be the information needs and the support tools. So it was really pleasing to see that level of engagement early on, because their guidance or rules are going to be critically important here to really support those practitioners.
Have you had any feedback from accountants about their preparations and about their concerns, maybe around, oh, here's another set of things that we have to adhere to?
Look, I think this one has probably not been front of mind when we look at the flurry of activities since the 2nd of July, with the various reforms around the Code of Conduct for under the Tax Practitioners Board, and some of the other measures such as the breach reporting that have flowed. So it's been a very lively, active space with some of the TPB reforms as the government sought to respond to the PwC scandal. So I think they've been sort of drinking from the fire hydrant somewhat with the rapid pace of change and the impacts it's going to have on practices in that space. So I think of concern to us, though, is that with the 2026 commencement dates, I think it's March 2026, it seems like a long way away. The temptation to defer looking at this, but this will be something, and that Ketty and Kath will be talking to, the need to start looking at it now, because as we know, every time we have these measures with a lead time, it feels like it's a long way away, but these deadlines come around really, really quickly, and it's an opportunity to consider them in light of some of the other reforms and avoid that double handling and make sure they get everything set up well in advance of the commencement date.
Now, if all that wasn't enough for practitioners to try and get a handle on, probably more current and more in the immediate term, I should probably say. You mentioned the Tax Practitioners Board, and there's been a lot of contention around the Code of Professional Conduct changes that have been sort of mooted there. There's been a little bit of back and forth to try and get a better outcome there. Where are we at with that? And obviously, one of the more contentious things is the dob-in provision of clients. So where does all that sit right now?
Yeah, so look, fortunately, we have seen some amendments to that determination, and we've had 2 stages of amendments since that original determination was registered in July. So the first of those was to introduce a transitional phase, because originally these measures were to commence on the 1st of August. So we had the registration of the instrument on the 2nd of July with a commencement date of 1st of August, which really did not give practitioners much time to get their heads around and to strictly comply with these new obligations. So the first amendment saw transitional measures. So for those with 100 or less employees, they have till 1 July 2025 to comply with these new code obligations. And those with 101 or more employees have from the 1st of January to comply. Now, of importance here will be the Tax Practitioners Board practical guidance, and we've seen the TPB put out for consultation 6 draft guidance documents which address the 8 new code obligations. Now, that closed towards the end of November, but the discussions are still ongoing. So as they're synthesising the feedback that they've received, the association is one of the representative bodies on the TPB's Governance and Standards Forum, and the engagement with that group throughout this process has been very high with the TPB, and that work continues as we try and support the TPB in the finalisation of that guidance. And then importantly, also the breach reporting, so the dobbing provisions, if you like, for tax practitioners to report other tax practitioners or indeed themselves. The TPB had previously put out guidance around that, but they've hit pause on that because they've recognised the need to make sure that that slots in with these other new obligations. So when it comes to the client reporting, we've seen a fundamental shift with that second amendment to the determination to change the language. In speaking with the Assistant Treasurer, he had a very clear vision of what that policy was to look like, but how it was playing out in the way that it was drafted didn't necessarily align. So we've got some substantial changes in the language around that, which are far more reasonable to how it was read to do with those initial versions.
Okay, well, Fabian, you've been sitting there very patiently and quietly so far as the discussion goes. So I'm going to turn to you now, but this is going to be more of a general discussion around what we might see and what we might witness at the national conference. So I might start with a really, really, really broad question, and that is, what are some of the other hot topics that will be addressed in Melbourne?
Yeah, thanks, Darren. Look, I mean, I'm probably going to start by thanking you because I suppose one of the sessions at the National Conference will be about the importance of different professionals staying in their respective lanes. And so I'm really pleased that you didn't bring me into any of those regulatory or policy discussions that we've just been having with Peter and Tracey. But having said that, all jokes aside, Peter and Tracey have already spoken about some legislative changes and policy developments that have happened throughout the year. And obviously those things go into the development of the National Conference program each year. So I suppose I thought that when getting some thoughts together around today's conversation, I'd probably reflect more on the questions that we receive from our members throughout the year, because one of the other inputs to developing the National Conference program, and probably one of the other benefits of being a member of the association, is access to our technical research service, where through that service we get hundreds of member inquiries on technical topics throughout the year. And that database of questions provides us with some pretty rich insights around what areas our members want more information on. And so that also feeds into the development of the National Conference program. And if I reflect on those questions, probably one of the most common areas that we get questions asked of us is around investment standards. And it's probably no surprise that the investment standards are high up there. I suppose every time you talk about SMSF specific strategies, there's quite often a link back to those investment standards. So at National Conference, it'll be interesting to hear from the regulator breaches of investment standards, in-house assets and loans to related parties, and those sorts of things are typically high up on their agenda list. So interesting to listen to them and hear what they've got to say. But also with, the fact that property is kind of that sort of second largest asset class in the SMSF sector. I mean, we get quite a few questions in that space. And so to address some of those areas, there will be a number of sessions around property-related strategy discussions, so business rule property, primary production land, related party transactions, and so on. So loads of things to talk about, I guess.
Will the property discussions cover the much talked about valuation requirements? Again, there's an area where accountants and advisors have to work pretty closely with not only the client but the auditor of the fund as well. Will the discussion sort of cover off some of those interrelationships and how each professional goes about it?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's I touched on it a moment ago with the specific session on staying in respective lanes, and so with a theme of the conference being around collaboration, I suspect a lot of these sessions will cross over the various professions of the attendees at national conference.
Yeah, no, I'm sure the discussions will be multifaceted as far as that goes, because everybody will have their own viewpoint from where they're coming from. To turn specifically to your session now, what will you be discussing? It's about accessing benefits.
Yep.
So again, drawing down, we talk a lot about contributions, don't we? But probably less so about actually getting your hands on your super legally, of course, and what
Yes.
sort of avenues are available there. So what sort of subjects will you be covering there?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's you touch on two of the other common areas, right? I mean, contributions is always a popular discussion point, reflected through our member inquiries, and also reflected in our attendee interest. I hear that our contribution-based workshop is nearly sold out, so it's obviously quite a popular topic with our attendees as well as our members. But we also get quite a bunch of questions around accessing super, death benefits and the like. And that sort of goes to highlighting, I guess, that our members are aware of the risks of getting things wrong in that space, but also highlighting some of the complexities that arise when you start to talk about accessing super, whether it be as a result of death or retirement or otherwise. But more specifically, the session I'm running, I guess, will focus on the definition of retirement, but more so the impact that retirement has on a range of superannuation and tax-related strategies, tying that in with the idea that we're seeing people retire later on in life, and the impact that might have on some of their strategic retirement planning. And tying it also into the change that occurred from 1 July this year, because preservation age, as you might recall, increased to age 60 on 1 July. And that's led to an interesting scenario in itself, because we previously had a condition of release which applied differently to someone who was aged between preservation age and 60, to how we would apply it to someone who was age 60 or over. But now that age 60 is preservation age, it's kind of left or forced us to have a bit of a shift in mindset. And so making sure that we have that sort of deeper understanding of the retirement condition of release is important. And then also seeing how that ties into aspects of contributions and deductibility of contributions, which also has where retirement also has an impact. So there'll be some of the things that I sort of touch on in that presentation.
Just judging from the queries that you receive from your membership, how well are those retirement rules understood? As in, retirement's got a very definitive connotation to it, but of course, that whole retirement concept is a little bit more flexible when it comes to accessing your super, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I don't think it's so much a matter of not understanding the retirement rules as such. It's probably more around seeking to apply those rules to different client scenarios, because the definition of retirement in itself is relatively black and white. But then when you try to apply that definition to different employment arrangements, there are different levels of complexity. So the sole trader who's retiring is very different to the employee who's retiring, is different perhaps to a director who might be standing down, people who have multiple employment arrangements. So it's not so much a lack of understanding that I think we see coming through, but more just a clarification around how it applies to different client circumstances.
So I mentioned audit issues before with when you mentioned property and with valuations, will any sort of other auditing issues, they seem to be in the gun a little bit at the moment and with a lot of scrutiny placed on them, will any of the other issues that they're facing be addressed?
Yeah, look, I think through the course of the conference program that there'll be a whole bunch of interesting areas of discussion that auditors will be particularly interested in. In fact, I think all the topics are of relevance to all the different professions, really. But yeah, look, I mean, there've been some specific issues that auditors maybe are more interested in, and you've touched on market valuations being one of them. But there's also the issue around managing litigation risks and things like that. So there's a whole bunch of sessions that will focus in on market valuations, managing litigation risk rather, and the importance of voluntary disclosures and things like that. So yeah, look, I think there's certainly plenty for auditors as well as all the other professions to take away from it.
That's fantastic, Fabian. I'm a little bit conscious of time. We're getting up to the hour that we've been allotted to present this webinar. So I thought I might just throw out a general sort of question as to potentially which sessions you are looking forward to on the program of the National Conference. Shall I start with you, Peter?
Oh, well, there's lots of sessions on that program that I'm really looking forward to. So it's really difficult to to find one. But the one that I mentioned it before was the Andrew Inwood session about SMSF's the best ever decade ahead. I think that's got my attention, that's for sure. But no doubt Craig Day's quiz session that was very popular last year. Hopefully I can do a little bit better this year. But that's a session I'll be brushing up on, and yeah, as I said, hopefully do a little bit better than I did last year. But yeah, look, it's really difficult because we do try and cater for everyone, the different professions, and we have a lot of variety of sessions on the program, they're all. I'm looking forward to seeing them all.
Tracey?
Yeah, I know, spoilful choice, aren't we, really? It is such a great program. The team do such a fantastic job. And look, and Fabian's workshop's definitely going to be one on my list. But I think also Ben Marshan's session on the delivering better financial outcomes, I think that's going to be a really important one. We're still waiting for the exposure draft legislation. So we saw an announcement from the minister this morning through media release. But I think it has the potential for other opportunities and to look at how that's going to impact advice businesses. So for me, I think that's a must see.
Fabian?
Probably not a fair thing to do to pick out a favourite, and it'd be remiss of me not to mention Peter and Tracey's sessions, I guess, as well as Keddy's. But look, I think as per Peter's comments earlier, I think the one that I would be looking forward to is the Super Mastermind session. I guess it's an opportunity for attendees to answer some questions themselves and show off their technical knowledge. Maybe answer some of the questions that they've asked us throughout the year as well. So see how we go and see who gets crowned the winner for that one.
Well, you've all stolen my thunder because that was going to be the one that I was going to nominate that I looked forward to. I remember discussing this with Craig Day last year, and he was really iffy about, I'm not sure whether or not this concept will really take off. I'm taking a bit of a risk. I thought it was outstanding, that session, personally, but a little bit contentious around some of the parameters that might need to be put in place for this year's quiz to happen. That's just what I hear. I'm not proposing anything, but that's just what I hear. So really looking forward to that. But as you said, Peter, Andrew's insights will be fascinating to see what he selected as the absolute optimistic outcome of the future of SMSFs. Well, as I alluded, we have actually run out of time. So I'd like to firstly remind you that the SMSF Association National Conference is going to be held at the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre, and that's going to be across the 19th to the 21st of February 2025. Please make sure to register now. You can see the details on your screen. There's a QR code that makes it a little bit easier for you to register. So if you want to scan that and do that, then that would be good, because we're all looking forward to seeing you at that conference. So other than that, I just would like to thank Peter, Tracey, and Fabian for your time today. I think it's been a great discussion. And after hearing that, who wouldn't be excited about going to Melbourne in February next year?
Thanks.
I certainly am.
Indeed. Thanks so much, Darren.
Yeah, thank you, Darren. See you in Melbourne.
Yep, looking forward to it. Thanks. Thanks, everybody. And thanks to all of you who joined the webinar. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. Thank you.